Welcome back, everybody. It is Tuesday, November 10th. We are continuing our post-election analysis series. Now, this is going to be our Senate video where we react to the various Senate races, all 35 of them. There are still just a small little handful that need to be resolved. This one out here in Alaska, but pretty clearly you can see where the results of this one are headed. And then this race has been called for Tom Tillis against Cal Cunningham, and then we do have two runoffs in the state of Georgia to discuss as well. So let's get right into it. You can see how the Democrats here flipped two seats with a net of one because the Republicans flipped one in Alabama. Needless to say, because of everything that we talked about over the course of this election season, this is a brutal result for the Democrats in the Senate. This is a terrible showing for them. I think you're going to see a little bit of a change in the leadership. I'm not sure Chuck Schumer is going to have the votes to remain as minority leader. There are some rumors. Kevin McCarthy today said that Nancy Pelosi does not have the votes to remain House Speaker after the Democrats also had a similarly bad showing in the U.S. House. We'll see if that remains the case. I think the chairwoman of the DCCC has also said that she will be stepping aside. This was a bad effort by the Democratic Party. We talked at length about Montana, Kansas, Iowa, both seats in Georgia, as we know, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maine. And the Democrats, in addition to these two out here in the Southwest, the Democrats were able to take those two, but nothing else. Again, we don't know yet what could happen in January with the runoffs in Georgia, but we shall see. So let's get right into it. This in Alaska, we thought it would be closer than this. Now, there are 25% of the vote remaining. If we just look at where some of these votes, the outstanding votes are, you got a lot left in Juneau. You don't even have half the vote in there yet. And that's obviously, I think enough to give Al Gross, make that a much closer race, but obviously it's just too big a margin right now. You come over here, Electoral District 38, there's some outstanding votes there, as well as in 39, some of these blue areas, and then right in here, there's just a teeny little handful left, but there's also a ton left in this big giant red district, Electoral District 6, and there's Electoral District 11, 31. There's just no way Al Gross is going to win this race. 5% for John Wayne Ho as well. So we can fully expect that Dan Sullivan will take this race. You never want to count Al Gross out. After all, he is someone who has killed a bear before, so we should give him his respect, but we fully expect Dan Sullivan and the Republicans to hang on to that one. And this is a common theme, okay? We expected this to be a closer race. Again, Democratic wave year, unpopular incumbent. We've not seen that kind of thing consistently. Here in Oregon, we knew this would be kind of the result for Joe Wade Perkins against Jeff Merkley, pretty right down the middle. This, I think, was kind of disappointing for the Democrats because we've seen in certain races that they can begin to get in the state of Idaho kind of into the high 30s, which the Republican Party does in almost every safe Democratic state, with the exception of D.C., and in some cases Hawaii. The Republican Party is able to get really good numbers. Now, not that high 30s is that good, but it's at least respectable. At least you have like a good presence in almost every safe Democratic state, whereas there's some Republican states where the Democrats are into the 20s, like this one here, and then down here, look at this, 19% for the Democrat. Now, that was split with two Democrats, but that only adds up to 30%. And this one for Paulette Jordan, who ran for the House 2 years ago, the Democrats were hoping that this would be a little bit higher up the rung, 33.3%. I think the Democratic Party would have liked to see a better showing here. In Montana, this is just bewildering to me. A 10-point win for Steve Daines, more than that, 10.4% over Steve Bullock. I expected this race to be at least like 4 to 6 points closer than this. I thought that the floor for Steve Bullock was going to be around 48 and change. For Steve Bullock to only get 44.8% in this state, to me, is very, very surprising. He is the most popular politician in the state of Montana, and he got smoked here, okay? Pretty bad numbers here in Yellowstone County. Not much to show for in Cascade and Lewis and Clark County. A little bit better in Lewis and Clark County. But over here in Missoula, ran up the numbers, but I sort of expected, Steve Bullock to have a pretty good show, kind of along where John Tester was able to do. And again, we did predict that Steve Daines would win this race, but I certainly thought Steve Bullock would have a better night than this. And again, there was a ton of money thrown into this race. This was one of the most hotly contested and watched debates over the course of the entire Senate election season. And for Steve Bullock to lose by over 10%. Is a huge success for the Republican Party. They had a ridiculously good night in the state of Montana. Finally got the governorship back on their side. They also won the House seat here. Kathleen Williams, Steve Bullock, and Mike Cooney all went down, while Greg Gianforte, Matt Rosendale, and Steve Daines all prevailed, as of course did Donald Trump. So this was a huge set of results for the Republicans and a brutal night in the state of Montana. For the Democrats. Wyoming, kind of the same thing. Nothing. I mean, it's just super, super red. One blue county here, Teton County, but not even 15,000 votes cast. You get the idea here. Now, obviously, Colorado. This one was about right where we expected it to be. In fact, I thought it would be ever so slightly closer than this, maybe like 1 point closer than this. But Cory Gardner, the writing was on the wall for him. I think him losing by 300,000 votes is about what we expected. Big turnout in Denver, obviously 78% of the vote for Hickenlooper. Again, voters really like him in the state of Colorado. He's someone, as the former governor here, he already had a lot of clout. He was very popular there. He didn't lose. That's not why he's not governor anymore. He just decided to run for president before switching gears and announcing his candidacy for the Senate. This was called pretty fast, and it was about what we expected. Cory Gardner got smoked. That's what we expected would happen. This was really one of the only races that was just kind of right exactly where we thought it would be in terms of the polling. As we said in our presidential post-game video, the polling in this election was pretty bad. Okay, it was bad, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video. Same kind of thing down here. Mark Kelly, as we expected, did defeat Martha McSally for a second Democratic flip on the night, won by about 3%. This was a little closer than we expected. We did think it would be closer than the Colorado race. This took a while to count. The votes in Arizona were counted at a much slower rate than Colorado. In fact, some networks still haven't even called this race on the presidential level yet. Mark Kelly did a pretty good job here in Maricopa County, which for, again, the city of Phoenix, like most urban areas will go blue. But as you can see, this is kind of a large land area. And so that's why it's only in light blue. It's kind of similar to some other areas around the country where it's, an urban area. And a lot of people ask, well, why in the world, is it not more blue? And the answer is it's just because it's a big county. Kind of similar to Tucson here, even though the numbers are bigger for Kelly down here. Now, there's sort of a strange error, I think, in some of the reporting here. You can see how the write-ins here have over 1,000 votes, whereas up here in the overall numbers, it's 593. So who knows why that is happening that way. It might just be an error in the reporting. Martha McSally has now given the Democrats 2 Senate seats. Kyrsten Sinema was able to give the Democrats the other. And I just want to I think it reaffirms that the state of Arizona, even though it was super close on the presidential level, and there's even a slim chance that Donald Trump will actually end up winning the state. I highly doubt that, but it's very possible. I do think Joe Biden will ultimately end up carrying. Again, let's not forget that Fox News and the Associated Press a whole week ago now actually had called the state, for goodness sake, for Joe Biden. And so, but regardless, I think Biden will end up winning the state by less than 10,000 votes. So it's definitely close, and but I think it's a state that the Democratic Party is definitely excited about moving forward. It's a state they can point to in 2 years, potentially, when Doug Ducey, the governor, is up. And again, in 4 years, I think you can start to think about these 11 electoral votes, which may grow in 4 years as a pivotal realignment state for them. This race was a lot closer than I thought. I did not expect Mark Ronchetti to get 45.7%. Let's just say this. If Ben Ray Lujan did not run up the numbers like he did here in Santa Fe County, he could have been in trouble. He only won by 55,000 votes here. Let's say if turnout was a little bit lower in New Mexico, and the Democrats maybe were a little bit more complacent here, that could have been a little worrisome for the Democrat. That's a good number for the Republicans. 45.7%. I know it was an open seat. There was no incumbency advantage, but this was not a seat that either party was really paying that much attention to. And I think Ben Ray Lujan and the Democrats, especially given the fact that these neighboring states here were so good to them, Arizona, Colorado, which have similar voting blocks, this is disappointing. To only win with a 6% win. I expected Ben Ray Lujan to win by 10 points, 12 points. Again, bad polling. Ben Ray Lujan led with huge margins over the course of the election season. One thing we're seeing all over the country, not just the western portion here, is that the Democratic Party was way overstated in the polling. Al Gross is probably going to lose by around 20%. Some of the polling had him within 3%. John Hickenlooper, that was about right. Mark Kelly led Martha McSally by a big margin. Again, remember that Fox News poll that, again, A-rated pollster that had him up by 17 points, won by less than 3%, Ben Ray Lujan by 6%. Mike Rounds wasn't even a race against Dan Ehlers, 34%. Ben Sass, not a race in the slightest. This libertarian candidate got 6% of the vote, over 50,000 votes. Another race we were paying close attention to, Roger Marshall wins by 12 points over Barbara Bollier. Now, I was the one who was saying that we didn't need to pay as much attention to this race, but it's proof that this was an aberration, that governor's race. And I think that's a big enough margin to the point where you can say if Chris Kobach had won that primary, that maybe even he would have defeated Barbara Bollier. And I think Kansas Republicans, simply said, stop right there. This is a ruby red state still, and even a former Republican current state senator who raised a lot of money and thoroughly outraised Roger Marshall, who's not a very well-known guy nationally, didn't even get within single digits of Roger Marshall. Jim Inhofe, not even a race against Abby Broyles. Another race that the Democrats were a little disappointed in was MJ Hager against John Cornyn, a 10-point defeat for MJ Hager. The Democrats only did about 4 points better on the presidential level. Now, that's not negligible, but again, it's kind of disappointing. I mean, the Democratic Party, I think, pointed to this race as kind of a long shot, but those aren't really long shot numbers, a 10-point defeat. That's a pretty thorough loss. Okay, up here in Dallas, 61% for MJ Hager. Joe Biden got just under 65%. Over here in El Paso, 63%. Again, these are lower numbers. Austin, 68%. Biden got over 70%. So this is further evidence that in states like this and in Georgia, you had Republicans voting against Donald Trump. There were split tickets. There were John Cornyn voters here that gave him the win by over 1 million votes. And they also, a good portion of them in some of the urban areas voted for Joe Biden. Okay? People seem to like divided government. We've known that for a long time. That was the case here. Minnesota was a state where the polling was actually pretty correct. Although even this was a little closer than I expected. Tina Smith, I did not expect to win with only a plurality of the vote. Kevin O'Connor, 5.9%. That's not nothing. Still got a teeny little bit of the vote left here. Minneapolis. I got to say, Hennepin County and the neighboring Ramsey County, I thought these would be into the 70s for the Democrats here because, again, of everything we talked about with the George Floyd situation. Now, the Republican, of course, only got 28% and 25%. So there's plenty unaccounted for there, and some of that was made up by Kevin O'Connor. But again, not much in Duluth. You didn't have, Minnesota voters voting for the Republican too much here. Again, there's not a lot of deep red here, whereas there are, 3 counties that are deep blue. But the reality of the situation is this is a pretty, again, I think the Republican Party's got to look at these results and say, we are just better at Senate elections than the Democrats. And as evidenced by, look at this race in Iowa. A 6-point win, 6.5-point win for Joni Ernst. We never expected that to happen. We thought this was a coin flip. And Teresa Greenfield didn't even come close. 45.2%. This was not as close as the gubernatorial race 2 years ago. And this was also about right where the presidential race was. This is not a state where we are seeing split ticket voters. Very little deep blue here, okay? In Des Moines, a 14-point win. That's pretty good for Teresa Greenfield. Over here in Cedar Rapids, over here in Davenport, not much of a win there. little bit of white, all that stuff. So the point is, we did not expect Teresa Greenfield to win by much of a margin at all. But we did expect her, at the very least, to lose by less than 1%. She lost by 6.6%. Okay? This race, the Montana race, and in particular this one that we're going to get to soon, really signifies to me that there is a serious problem with polling in the United States. The Democrats also lost a House seat here. Abby Finkenauer, up here in this area, kind of the northeast portion of the state, they lost that House district, Abby Finkenauer. So bad showings, again, for the Democrats in Iowa. Arkansas, it's about what we expected, not even a Democratic candidate. And we already mentioned Louisiana. Mississippi, 42.4%. That's kind of what we thought would happen, okay, for Mike Espy. We never really thought this was a real race. He did okay, got big numbers here in Jackson. But Tupelo and in Harrisburg and Biloxi, it's just too red. It's just too red a state. I don't think I thought that Mike Espy was going to be able to get in, deeper into the mid 40s because, again, high African American turnout, and he is someone that is well liked within his state, but he's obviously not that well liked considering he has now lost 2 different Senate races to the same person. Another state that I think if you're the Republicans, you have to say, okay, sure, maybe some of these Sunbelt areas are growing more Democratic like Arizona and Georgia, but these states are not shifting. A thorough win for Tommy Tuberville over Doug Jones. Wasn't even close. Mobile went red by 5 points, almost 6 points. Okay, Montgomery did go blue by 35% for Doug Jones. These are some pretty big margins, but very low vote totals, and it's what gave Tommy Tuberville a 20% victory. I thought Doug Jones, kind of like Mike Espy, would get 40% at least because of high African-American turnout, but that just didn't pan out. And, the Democratic Party on the presidential level has a lot to be happy about in that they were able to get a black turnout in Philadelphia, in Detroit, in Milwaukee, but in some of these Senate races, it just didn't work out for them. Okay, in Georgia, we know that both of these races are advancing to a runoff. The polling in Georgia was actually right about there. Okay, this was basically right in line with what we thought would happen. We thought David Perdue would win with a small margin. That's about what happened. Okay, now John Ossoff, has been able to close this gap over the last couple of days. He's now officially down by 87,000 votes, just under that, against David Perdue. Look, I think what happened in this state was you had ridiculously high African-American turnout. Stacey Abrams and the Democratic organizers down here made it happen. Look at these numbers here. Big numbers in Fulton County, huge numbers in DeKalb County, very good in Athens, pretty good in Richmond. Good enough in Savannah, for which is just there's not a big enough concentration of college-educated voters. Sometimes even Macon will go red, and a 21-point win it was for John Ossoff, okay? You come over here, in this race, it's a little bit different, okay? You sort of have all the split red votes here, and then again, we saw the same thing in DeKalb for Raphael Warnock and Deborah Jackson and the rest of it. But so it's just a matter of what kind of consolidation do we get. In this race here, this is again about what we expected. David Perdue winning with a small margin. This is also right around where I would expect the January runoff to happen. Now, look, you give Stacey Abrams and the Democrats basically 2 more months to get it all figured out down here, they can make something happen. And remember, they just proved that a Democrat can win in this state because Joe Biden just won the state of Georgia, okay, which is pretty significant. A Democrat has not won Georgia in 28 years. All right, that's 7 elections straight that it has gone red, and now a Democrat has it. That is pretty substantial, and I think we need to watch out for this state going forward. I think Stacey Abrams ought to be on the short list for DNC chair because she has shown over and over, even when she was in the state legislature, she is a rock star organizer. And I think, yes, I would expect David Perdue to win this race at the end of the day, but John Ossoff, I think, will get right around 48% of the vote. The reality of the situation is, though, I think that there were just some Republicans in Atlanta, in Athens, and in some of these suburban areas that are Republicans. They voted for David Perdue. They voted for Kelly Loeffler, but they just don't like Trump. They're just sick of Trump. And as a result, I think that just pushed Joe Biden over the finish line, and they will go back to the polls in January and reaffirm that Republican firewall in the U.S. Senate. Okay, the same exact thing as we said here with Raphael Warnock. This isn't good enough for him. That's not anywhere near good enough. Only 33% of the vote. Again, it will get higher than this. He will get over 40%. I think he will have a lot of voters in Atlanta and suburban Atlanta that will go to the polls and will fill in the bubble for both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. We do know that in this state there are a number of black Republicans, okay? In which case you could get some Raphael Warnock and David Perdue voters. We do think some of the early data that we've seen that black Republicans are in part what pushed Joe Biden into the lead ultimately in Georgia, in that maybe some of them did vote for David Perdue, but voted for Raphael Warnock and Joe Biden. Okay. This race wasn't close. We expected that. Tennessee's a ruby red state at this point. South Carolina, another really disappointing state for the Democrats. Jamie Harrison, a 10-point defeat to Lindsey Graham. They thought they had a legit shot to win this. I thought Jamie Harrison would get close to what Beto O'Rourke got 2 years ago against Ted Cruz. O'Rourke got 48.3% of the vote. I thought Jamie Harrison would lose, but with around 47%. 44.2 is respectable against Lindsey Graham, but still pretty disappointing, if you're a Democrat. Got the numbers he needed in Columbia, but just not in Charleston. Okay, only a 26,000 vote difference. Had to make up 250,000 votes and change there. I think if you're the Democratic Party, the presence of Jim Clyburn here gives you reason to believe that you have a chance. But the reality of the situation is this race is good proof that money isn't everything. There are limits as to what money can do in politics. Why do I say that? Because Jamie Harrison was the best fundraising candidate that I think I've ever seen. $57 million in one quarter alone. Got Lindsey Graham to the point where he was going on Fox News every night begging for money. And he did worse than James Smith, who I'm not sure anyone's heard of, did in the most recent gubernatorial race against Henry McMaster. In a race that got very little attention and had far less money poured into it, James Smith outperformed Jamie Harrison by 2%. Okay, it shows you that money just does not end up making up all the difference sometimes. And I think potentially the pandemic had something to do with this, but this is still a red state. We have to recognize that. 44.2% is not nothing, but it's not that close either. Again, this race has been called. This is a bad result for the Democrats. Okay, and I keep focusing on the Democrats because they were the ones that were on offense here. This was another opportunity for them that I had characterized for Cal Cunningham the entire election season. And I gotta say, he kind of blew it. Okay, the sex scandal, that hurt him. And he lost by almost 2%. He called Tom Tillis to concede today. And, I think this is one of those races. This was officially the most expensive Senate race in United States history. And the Democrats they blew it here. It's hard to know exactly why. They also lost this on the presidential level, but I think Cal Cunningham's sexting scandal was really, really bad for him, number one. Joe Biden barely outperformed him as well in this state. This was another state where the polling was just wrong. Okay, the polling was just incorrect. Cal Cunningham had big leads pretty much throughout the election season. His lead did shrink when the sexting scandal arose, but again, we kept saying that we thought that he was going to be okay because he, had a big enough lead, number one, and because thousands of people had already voted, and you can't, change your vote. So I thought that was going to be a reason that Cal Cunningham was going to be able to survive out here. Probably will end up losing by less than 2%. This gap will probably narrow because there are 3% left, and that'll probably be just a few thousand extra mail-in votes for Cunningham. But this is, again, one of those states that the Democrats are going to look back on. And I think in 2 years, it is another notable state to watch because Roy Cooper might be the one to jump in, who won re-election the other night, he might be the one to jump in and challenge for that open Senate seat that is going to be vacated by Richard Burr. So definitely something to watch there. Illinois, I'm even surprised Mark Curran, the Republican, got 40%. Now we have 10% of the vote remaining, and some of that, a big chunk of that is in Cook County. So I think Dick Durbin's numbers will grow here to where the Republicans usually will end up with around 38% of the vote here. That's what Mark Kirk, an incumbent Republican no less, got against Tammy Duckworth when the Democrats took that seat. But again, further evidence that even in a state like Illinois, which is a very safe Democratic state, the polling can be quite off. Amy McGrath, not even close against Mitch McConnell, and a big waste of money for the Democrats. And I got to say, the Democratic Party is very guilty of this a lot, where they get a lot of people from California, from New York, to throw a bunch of money into a pretty unrealistic race. Okay, this is how Beto O'Rourke got so much fundraising. This is how Jamie Harrison got so much fundraising. And of course, that's over $100 million down the drain between two candidates, neither of which came close to victory, especially Amy McGrath, who lost by 20% to Mitch McConnell. There was nothing to talk about here. Paula Jean Swearengin never had a chance. In Virginia, this is kind of right around where I thought it would end up. A 12-point, pretty solid win for Mark Warner. Always a state that the Republicans are going to be competitive in. 44% is plenty respectable. But as we know, it has shifted over the years, and it is now a Democratic state through and through. In the state of Michigan, that is close. 1.7% for Gary Peters against John James. Look, the reality of the situation is the Rust Belt is becoming more Republican. Okay? Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. These states are shifting rightward. Now, I know that a Democrat just won the presidency here, and both senators are Democrats as of Tuesday, and the governor is a Democrat. But the Congress remains conservative, red, and Gary Peters just won by 1.7% against John James. Joe Biden outperformed Gary Peters here. It was around the same in Ann Arbor, a little bit better again, though, for Joe Biden. Again, reaffirming my belief that there were just a lot of Republicans who split their tickets, who voted for John James, who voted for Jason Lewis, who voted for Mark Ronchetti, who voted for John Cornyn, for David Perdue, but voted for Joe Biden because they're just sick of Trump, they're sick of his antics, they're sick of the tweets, the whole deal, okay? But this was also another state that the Democrats were not sure they were going to win on election night, and I think that they're going to have to spend quite a bit of money in these three states in order to hang on and be able to survive in the future because they're shifting away from them. Chris Coons, easy win for him in Delaware, right around what we expected. Cory Booker, 57.4. I think if you're a Democrat for an incumbent as well known, especially as Cory Booker, you'd like to see a little bit better result than that. Now, this could rise because, again, Trenton and especially Essex County have a lot of votes left. So that number could rise. I think it'll be similar to Illinois, just like there's been a ton of noise in recent days about the presidential margins in New York, how Donald Trump was showing 43% in this state. That is not the real number. A lot of votes in Manhattan and the surrounding areas still have a lot of votes left to count. That'll push that number down. Jack Reed, easy win for him in Rhode Island, trying to get this in the frame. 66%, all counties going blue, easy win. Massachusetts, right around the same thing, all counties going blue for Ed Markey. Also for the Democrats, good to see because I think they were paying attention to this race just because they wanted to see if the primary between Ed Markey and Joe Kennedy ended up reducing Markey's number at all. This was definitely a competitive race up here in New Hampshire, but look at that. Every county ended up in blue, and once we got the full number in, this margin grew. Corky Messner was getting a pretty good share, over 45% as of just 2 days ago, but all the mail-in votes come, and there we go. This is just a shocker. I am just flabbergasted by this. A 7-point win for Susan Collins. That's incredible. Okay, let's come down here to Cumberland County. Why isn't it letting me click on it? You do have some outstanding votes, not much, but so this number might grow a little bit. You have 10% of the vote left, but some of that's in Bangor, Hancock County. These are Republican counties. Washington County. This is incredible to me that Susan Collins was able to win number one, and by 60,000 votes. Now, again, this margin might go up or down, but you have to go back to July to find a poll that Susan Collins led Sarah Gideon in. There is a serious issue with polling in the United States. It was not that wrong in 2016. It was a little wronger in 2018, and it was just way off in 2020. The Quinnipiac polls were horrendously bad. Now, again, I want to reiterate that there is no such thing as a quote-unquote wrong poll, because it is just statistics. And so basically all the polls are showing you are probabilities, and so the outliers can win. So a poll is not quote-unquote wrong, but a poll can be misleading. And for the Democrats to lose basically everywhere except these two, which we knew they were basically shoo-ins for, to get not even close in Montana, not that close at all in Iowa, to likely lose both seats in Georgia, get smoked in South Carolina, shockingly lose in North Carolina, and get hosed in Maine, and then to barely squeak one out in Michigan and win in Minnesota by a margin that they're not satisfied with, is just shocking. That they performed this poorly in the Senate. A wipeout as well in Alaska. Now, there were some that were about where we thought were correct. Minnesota was good enough. I think we expected that to be around that margin. New Hampshire was a very resounding win for Jeanne Shaheen. Mark Warner did fine. In Virginia, Dick Durbin, that'll end up going, that'll be a much bigger margin. But New Mexico, another state that was very friendly to the Republicans, there was a big shift in there were just voters who voted for Joe Biden and then went down ballot and voted for the Republican Party. I'm sorry, but if you ask me, putting on my just the analysis hat here, if you ask me like, okay, and I've gotten some comments, like I'm just going to sort of lump them all together into one here. Like, which party has to do more soul searching after this election? It is without question, if you ask me, the Democratic Party. Okay? The Republican Party just flipped seats in the House when they weren't expected to, and easily hung on to the Senate. I know that's not official yet, but as of now, we can expect that to happen in a map that was brutal for them. Okay, and in 2 years, we've talked about the amount of races that are up again for Republicans. Rob Portman in Ohio, Marco Rubio in Florida, open seat in North Carolina, open seat in Iowa, open seat probably in Wisconsin, open seat in Pennsylvania. Well, you can scratch off the open seat in Ohio and the open seat in Florida. Florida has shifted rightward every year since 2014. Okay? So has Ohio. All right? These states are shifting rightward. If you ask me which seat, in that Senate map do the Democrats have a shot at, I think if Roy Cooper runs in North Carolina, the Democrats can win there. I would expect the Democrats to be the favorite in an open seat in Pennsylvania. Otherwise, it's an uphill battle, and they may lose a seat in New Hampshire with Maggie Hassan. Nevada is a close state. Okay, Catherine Cortez Masto might have a tough race on her hands in 2 years. Okay, so I think the Democratic Party, yeah, they ousted the presidency, and they do have 2 of the 3 branches of government. But I think we can fully expect that the Republicans are going to win back the House in 2 years. It's possible the Democrats could get back the Senate, particularly if they're able to get one of these seats here. But it's like the Democratic Party is just getting crushed in these Senate races when they got walloped in 2014 in the Senate. Did not manage to win back control in 2016. Didn't even come close to winning back control in 2018. In fact, fell further behind and came up way short this time around. Okay, this is a huge result for the Republicans in the United States Senate. Susan Collins, what a win for the GOP here. What a win here in North Carolina. Big retention here, big retention there. Not even close in Kansas, nothing to talk about in South Carolina. We'll obviously talk at length about these two, although I'm a little skeptical of the Democratic Party's chances. This one was about what we expected, and this one was much closer than the Democratic Party would have liked. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. We're obviously going to have a lot to talk about with these Georgia races coming up. Thanks for bearing with me this week. I always take a little bit of time off after the elections have passed, just because we've been doing videos every day. But we're obviously going to be coming out with a lot more information for you real soon. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, comment down in the suggestions below if you have any comments, questions, concerns, corrections, anything you may have for me. So thank you guys again so much for watching. I'll see you in November.